Well, hello to my lovely viewers and subscribers. Apologize if you've been waiting for a long time, but I'm finally back from Cambridge and auditing a course. So finally got to jot down my notes on this book. And I'll have you know I actually finished another little section in this book as well. So there will be more videos to come. So I finally gathered my thoughts together and summarized them a little bit. So hopefully these videos are a little bit more helpful and bit more focused on what I'm trying to get at. So if you didn't see my previous video, I'm just going to give you a very quick summary of this section that I've read. It's called The Mute Christian Under the Smarting Rod. Basically, this painful or disciplining rod. And then Thomas Brooks, he's talking about why should Christians be, in a sense, silent under, great trials, great afflictions, great sufferings. Why shouldn't they complain? And basically it's a grave sin to complain. So you must discern, and I'll get into that a little bit more, why are you going through this period of affliction and suffering? And then is it fitting for a Christian to complain? Is it right to grumble against God, just like how the Israelites did in the Old Testament, just like how the Pharisees and the scribes, they grumbled against Jesus? Is that right? So if you haven't seen my previous video, I give you more of a general summary. This video, I'm going to read some quotes, so hopefully hit on some of those points a little bit harder. And I'm thinking there will probably be a part 2. There's a lot of great things that he's just written in here, and you can see just second half of this book, there's a bunch of just sticky notes. So Brooks, again, if you haven't heard me say it enough, his writing is just spectacular. So solid, rich with biblical imagery, lots of illustrations from even outside of the Bible that just help illustrate his point just so well and really drive them home. So again, I highly recommend any Thomas Brooks work that you can get your hands on, because by far he's my favorite Puritan that I've read. Every work I've just enjoyed, and I've had that itching feeling of I just wish I had more time to read Brooks, right? Whatever responsibilities I have, let me finish it quick so I can just get to Brooks. So all that to say, such a good writer. Now I'll show you the first quote here. I can point you up to the top here. This is in his introduction before he even really starts getting to his main point. So here, the one quote I want to point you to is, "There is no fear of knowing too much, though there is much fear in practicing too little. The most doing man shall be the most knowing man. The mightiest man in practice will in the end prove the mightiest man in scripture." So here, that is a good warning and piece of advice for anyone who reads quite a bit. It's easy to read a lot, but it can all just end up being head knowledge, right? And here, of course, it's easy to read about, why should you not complain or grumble as you go through suffering? It's another thing, of course, to put into practice, because the moment you receive suffering, your instinct is probably, why is this happening to me, right? Why is God treating me this way? So, of course, this applies to anything that we really read from the Bible. We read it, we do well to really meditate upon it, ponder, these truths. How do they apply to me? And then, of course, beware, right? When it's time to put into practice, out of all that we know, are we putting into practice? There's no fear in knowing too much, but there is much fear in practicing too little. So, word of advice for us all. And that's just in his introductory part. The first quote that I'll point you over to is here in his third section. So he's already covered a couple sections already, but here he's saying, what does a holy and a right silence under affliction, what does it not exclude? What are you allowed to do, right? And basically here he says, first, a holy, prudent, holy prudent silence under affliction does not exclude and shut out a sense of feeling our afflictions. And in Psalm 39:9, though he was dumb and laid his hand upon his mouth, yet he was very sensible of his affliction. Verses 10 and 11, remove thy stroke away from me, I am consumed by the blow of your hand. When you, with rebukes, do correct man for iniquity, you make his beauty to consume away like a moth. Surely every man is vanity. He is sensible of his pain as well as of his sin, and having prayed off his sin in the former verses, he labors here to pray off his pain. Diseases, aches, sicknesses, pains, they are all the daughters of sin. And he that is not sensible of them, as the births and products of sin, does but add to his sin, and provoke the Lord to his sufferings. No man shall ever be charged by God for feeling his burden, if he neither frets nor faints under it. Grace does not destroy nature, but rather perfect it. Grace is of a noble offspring. It neither turns men into stocks, nor to stoics. The more grace, the more sensible of the tokens, frowns, blows, and lashes of a displeased father. Though Calvin, under his greatest pains, was never heard to mutter nor murmur, yet he was heard often to say, how long, Lord, how long? A religious commander being shot in battle, when the wound was searched and the bullet cut out, some standing by but pitying his pain, he replied, though I groan, yet I bless God, I do not grumble. God allows his people to groan, though not to grumble. It is a God-provoking sin to be stupid and senseless under the afflicting hand of God. God will heat that man's furnace of affliction 7-fold times hotter, who is in the furnace but feels it not. Who gave Jacob for a spoil and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord, he against whom we have sinned? For they would not walk in his ways, neither were they obedient unto his law. Therefore he has poured upon him the fury of his anger, the strength of battle, and he has set him on fire round about. Yet he knew not, and it burned him, yet he laid it not to heart. Stupidity lays a man open to the greatest fury and severity. The physician, when he finds that the potion which he has given his patient will not work, he seconds it with one more violent, and if that will not work, he gives another yet more violent. If a gentle plaster will not serve, then their chirurgeon or surgeon applies that which is more corroding, and if that will not do, then he makes use of his cauterizing knife. So when the Lord afflicts, and men feels it not. When he strikes, and they grieve not. When he wounds them, and they awake not. Then the furnace is made hotter. Then his fury burns. Then he lays on irons upon irons, bolt upon bolts, and chain upon chain, until he has made their lives a hell. Afflictions are the saints' diet drink. And where do you read in all the scripture that ever any of the saints drunk of this diet drink and were not sensible to it? So, fairly long quote, and here he's saying it's right to have a sense of your pain. If you were to, undergo some sort of pain and not be sensible of it, that's almost like just wrong, because you're just pretending as if that pain just does not exist. But what Brooks is really getting here is, if you are rightly being afflicted, it's okay to groan. You can, you groan under the pain, like, oh, it's painful. And like Calvin, right, you ask God, how long? But you don't grumble against God. Though you groan, you do not grumble. You don't, say, oh, God, you're unjust, or, oh, I'm undeserving of this affliction. But you groan under the pain, like, oh, it does hurt. Because any affliction, any suffering, it is painful. There's no way around that one. And if you choose not to groan, if you pretend as if this affliction is nothing, right? There, you saw that little phrase there, the Stoics. If you become like the Stoics, you just take this view where, like, oh, things just happen. So the best course of action is just not to resist. I'm just gonna, have no reaction to anything. Happy things, no reaction. Bad things, no reaction. But that's also wrong, because if that's the case, right, it almost shows that you don't recognize, at least either God's hand is sovereign in this, or there is some correction that you rightly need to go under. because it could be God using affliction for your sin. And then basically, when God sees no response, he's going to make the affliction even harder. So there you can see, like, adding a bolt onto bolt, chain onto chain, making the furnace even hotter. And it's that imagery, right, of like a physician, if he finds like a patient just is sick with something, and then this antidote he puts in, there's no effect. Well, he has to use like a stronger and like more bitter, more unbearable kind of like medicine to really expel that poison out of the patient. Or even like the surgeon, you put like that plaster on. I believe that plaster is a cast. If I'm not, then I apologize. But the cast doesn't work, then he's gonna have to start using like maybe an acid, or bring out his knife at last, right? You want to avoid the surgery, but if you can at least put in a cast and it heals, that's great. But if it doesn't heal, then you gotta cut it open and fix it there, and that's a more painful solution. So there, it is right to groan, but not to grumble. It's right to express your pain. And on to the next one. To the next quote. Here, again, here, when you are under pain, I apologize there, I lost a little bit what exactly I want to say here. But here, when God strikes you, here I want to put you over here. When God strikes, he looks that we should tremble. When his hand is lifted high, he looks that our hearts should stoop low. When he has the rod in his hand, he looks that we should have tears in our eyes. As you may see by comparing of these scriptures together. Psalm 55:2, 38:6, Job 30:26-32. Good men weep easily, says a Greek poet, and the better any are more inclining to weeping, especially under affliction. As you may see in David, whose tears, instead of gems, were the common ornaments of his bed. Jonathan, Job, Ezra, Daniel, etc. How, says one, shall God wipe away my tears in heaven, if I shed none on earth? And how shall I reap in joy, if I sow not in tears? I was born with tears, and I shall die with tears. Why then should I live without them in this valley of tears? So there are another great quote, because when you groan, when you feel the pain of your affliction that God brings upon you, how will you try to relieve it? Because Brooks, he says it's not wrong to pray that that your afflictions would come to an end. Of course, you're just patience first, but it's not wrong to pray that your afflictions would be relieved, would be taken away from you. And here, I can imagine that imagery of like a child being under discipline. When God raises his hand to strike, the best thing is not just to speak with your tongue and say, please don't strike me, but to really like you show the pain, right? You start crying, you weep, you cry not with your tongue but with your eyes, not with your words but with your tears. And then that's what God is looking for. He's seeing, is this child of mine repentant? Do they have remorse over their sin? Because I think what you'll find is that people talk is cheap, right? Anyone can say anything. But whether or not they feel that truth deep in their hearts, that's a different thing all entirely. So here it's not just you affirm it in your words, but even in your heart, right? Has that truth changed you? Is your heart convicted that is true? So here, weep, right? We're born with tears, we will die with tears. Why then should you not live without tears in this valley? Why should you not, under times of affliction, mourn over, if there was a sin that caused it, why should you not mourn over it? And you can as well grieve over the pain. To the next quotes. Here, I'm pointing you at the very bottom. So why must Christians be mute and silent under the greatest afflictions, the saddest providences, and sharpest trials that they meet with in this world? I answer, reason 1, that they may the better hear and understand the voice of the rod. As the word has a voice, the spirit a voice, the conscience a voice, so the rod has a voice. Afflictions are the rod of God's anger, the rod of his displeasure, and his rod of revenge. He gives a commission to his rod to awaken his people, to reform his people, or else to revenge the quarrel of his covenant upon them, if they will not bear the rod and kiss the rod, and sit mute and silent under the rod. So I'll stop there. But here, this is something important to consider as well. Why has God brought affliction upon you? Sometimes it's not always clear why God does it. So, why has God really brought that affliction upon you? Is it sin that you've committed? Is it, how is it being worked out for your good? And here, Brooks is talking more specifically to the instance where it is a certain sin, where God is disciplining you for a certain sin from before. And here, it's important that you do keep your silence. Elsewhere, though, I should mention that just because God doesn't give you a reason for why the affliction has come upon you, doesn't mean that it's okay to grumble. In one sense, we must remember, God is sovereign. So, just because, you don't understand why that suffering is happening, doesn't mean you get to charge God with God, you're unjust, or, I can complain until you give me a reason. God can do as he wishes. But here, God, this is the rod of his displeasure. This is how God disciplines his children. And again, it's important, I think, because we are prone to not reflecting deeply enough on sins. We're very quick to groan about affliction, right? Affliction, oh, why am I suffering? But then consider, right, how much more sin have I committed? What sins am I still holding dear in my heart that I have not turned away from? Are any of these sins that are near and dear in my heart, things that God is trying to correct me of through affliction? Because through affliction, we truly do die to the world. The world becomes less appealing, less attractive, and it just reminds you, right, these short, sinful pleasures, these pleasures that are just fleeting away, just so short-lived, they really do us no good. Sin is the thing that offends God the most. So why should we not put it all to death? Now we can go on to the next quote. Here, I lost my place in the book, but here. Fourthly, to move you to silence under your sorest and sharpest of trials, consider that you have deserved greater and heavier afflictions than those you are under. Has God taken away one mercy? You have deserved to be stripped of all. Has he taken away the delight of your eyes? He might have taken away the delight of your soul. Are you under outward wants? You have deserved to be under outward and inward together. Are you cast upon a sick bed? You have deserved a bed in hell. Are you under that ache and that pain? You have deserved to be under all aches and pains at once. Has God chastised you with whips? You have deserved to be chastised with scorpions. Are you fallen from the highest pinnacle of honor to the scorn and contempt of men? You have deserved to be scorned and condemned by God and angels. Are you under a severe whipping? You have deserved an utter damning. Ah, Christian, let your eyes be fixed upon your demerits, and your hands be quickly upon your mouths. Whatever is less than a final separation from God, whatever is less than hell, is mercy, and therefore you have cause to be silent under the smartest dealings, the most painful dealings, of God with you. So there sort of highlights that point again. If you truly understood the weight of your sin as a Christian, if you've understood, right, how much you've sinned against God, even daily, right, how many sins have I committed today, how many have I committed yesterday, how many I'm still going to commit. If God has just taken away a little mercy, a tiny comfort away from you, and that's already like a sharp trial. That's a sore affliction, or even it just brings those sharp and sore afflictions and trials. You still deserve to be dealt with far more harshly than God has actually dealt with you. And right away here, I think of Psalm 103, right? God, He has not dealt with us according to our iniquities. And if you truly reflect, right, like, what sins have I committed against God? And you take an honest inventory, right? You reflect on your day, reflect on your week, and you see all those sins. And you wonder then, right, why has God dealt so well with me? These little trials, little afflictions, God truly has not dealt with me according to my sins, to my iniquities. And here Brooks, he just pieces it all together, right? You know, has God put you upon a sick bed? Well, you deserve the bed in hell. Have you gotten like just scorn and rejection by men? Well, you deserve scorn and rejection by God and the angels. All these things, right? When you sort of just look towards God and you see, yes, I deserve death. My sin has been such a serious offense against God. All these other things are just so minor, so small. What is it to be scorned by men? What is it to be sick if I have peace with God, if God does not reject me? So, looking at the time, it's already 20 minutes, so I'm just going to give a short, tiny summary of what I've said so far, or I guess more so reflection. And I'll probably make 2 or 3 parts for this whole book. But here, again, Brooks, he just makes so many good points as to why a Christian should never ever grumble or murmur against God during times of affliction. There's so much danger in that. There's a great sin. And there was a quote, I'm not sure if I wanted to pull it up this time. I don't have it pulled up this time. I'll make mention of it next time, but here, again, there's this question that every Christian must consider. You know, is it better to suffer a lot of affliction, a great amount of affliction, or to commit the least sin to avoid all that affliction? The least sin. And the answer is, it's better to endure affliction, because there's no sin in that. In terms of evil, affliction itself is not evil, but sin is so evil. That's what drove Christ to the cross, and that's often why afflictions come upon us. So here, it really puts into perspective, right? Because the Puritans are just so big on sin is one of the worst things that anyone can do. And in a later quote, Brooks drives his point home again. It's just, you as a Christian, even though you've been saved and you still sin, isn't that just the most awful thing? That you've had more lights, right? You've had more knowledge of who God is. You know God's word. And yet you still sin. Isn't that even just so much worse? And really consider, right? How does God deal with you? He's dealt bountifully with me. He's dealt very kindly with me. Dealt very well with me. Though I do not deserve it. He's dealt gracefully with me. And I just wish I could summarize the book so much more, but this whole book, the summary will probably be like an hour and a half to 2 hours in its entirety, right? But here, just little bits, right? You understand the severity of the affliction and you submit yourself to God. That's the best course of action. If you don't submit yourself to God in humble silence, then God will make it even more unbearable. The furnace will be hotter. More chains will be added. It will be a longer punishment, a longer time under suffering. But when you submit yourself to God, when you submit in a holy silence, right, you don't grumble or murmur or complain against God, then you find that God relieves you of your afflictions. At that point, God sees that you have felt the weight of your sin. You felt the consequences of it. You've understood the severity of your sin itself against God. Then there's no more need for the affliction. Affliction, it's served its purpose if it's done that. So, an encouragement to you all, just things to consider, right? just how serious is your sin, and then when God reproves you and disciplines you for your sin, how are you going to respond? Are you going to justify God's name? Are you going to be silent before God? Submit yourself to Him until the affliction is lifted? Or will you incur more wrath? Will you need stronger afflictions to cure the hardness of your heart, the wickedness of your heart? So hopefully this has been helpful for you to some degree. I'll have more sections coming out of it. But until then, hopefully that's been helpful to you, something to consider as you go through affliction, because I'm sure each one of us, we all go through times of affliction, and we all have sin, so God is going to bring affliction upon us to discipline us. But it is for our good, and I'll mention that in the future videos as well. There are good purposes to God bringing these afflictions, and there are good ends that come out of it. So thanks again for watching, and hope to see you in the next video. Grace to you all and peace.